I think there was still, the Risardi page when I logged in.
Oh dear.
All good.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I thank you very much for joining us in the first of our 2024 online tastings. I'm joined by Georg Lingenfelder from Weingut Lingenfelder in the Pfalz in Germany this evening. And we've got a very interesting evening in terms of the wines, in terms of the suggested food matches, and just in general catching up with Georg on his family business. Welcome, Georg. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, welcome everybody, and yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks for your interest in our wines, in German wine and food culture.
So before we kick off, the house rules are in the chat, and any questions can also be put into the Zoom chat. We'll take a break after the first two wines to allow you to top up with water or nibbles or anything like that. And the other thing to say is that we are offering a bottle of the Estate Riesling tonight for the best question that we get. But the question has to be asked during the first two wines. So get your thinking caps on and come up with any interesting questions you've got for Georg. And the winner of that question gets a bottle of Estate Riesling sent out. So Georg, welcome again. Thank you very much for joining us. You were saying you're pretty busy at the moment pruning the vineyards because it's been quite a warm January.
Exactly, yeah. So this is basically, or a winemaker's life never rests. So even during winter, when outside in the nature everything is quite slow, and all the plants are in a sleep mode, basically, we have to prune them and make them ready for the next year. We also call this like the grape education. So we trying to set them up. Teach them how they should grow in the next year. And this is what we do, basically all day over the winter period. So even during like cold, snowy days, we need to be outside to get everything done before, basically end of March, when the bud burst is starting. Then everything needs to be set up and prepared for the new season.
Great. So tell me, is it 14th generation at the estate?
Yeah, it sounds a bit unreal, but that's the fact. So I'm the 14th generation in our family now that is committed to winemaking, or winemaking combined with farming. I mean, back in the days, there were not a lot of places where they only made wine. It was hard to live just of wine. So of course there was agriculture involved as well. And nowadays we specialized, pretty much on wine. We have a few chickens running around, but but wine is the main business.
That's the main business.
So yeah, 14 generations. That's about 500 years now.
And your mum and dad are still there on the estate working away every day as well, aren't they?
Yes, and I'm happy they're still running around. I mean, as a winemaker, there's always quite a bit of traveling involved as well. So whenever I'm not at home, they can welcome anybody who wants to see what we're doing, and basically all the stuff that needs to be done like in the winery when I'm not there.
Okay. Paddy is saying that the sound is very low. I can hear Georg okay. Can you hear me, Paddy? Is it just Georg you can't hear?
Okay, let me see if maybe I'll pull all that a bit towards me and talk a bit louder. Is that better now?
I can hear you certainly louder now.
Yes? Okay, so we'll try that now.
Okay. It's maybe, I can hear fine as well, Mary. So maybe, Paddy, maybe turn up the volume on your machine or your device or something. And somebody said that is better.
Okay.
Sonia said that's better on the sound.
Perfect. Yeah.
How-
I'll just talk a bit louder and then
Okay,
I hope you can all hear me.
okay. Paddy, I hope you can hear a bit better now. You can maybe let us know. So, George, maybe while we're chatting, we'll start with the first wine, which is the Gewürztraminer.
Yes.
I think it's interesting to hear about the labels because there's an interesting story that involves a US designer on the labels, isn't there?
Yes, yes. It's actually the same designer that did the Leapfrog labels. Maybe some of you still know that from
Yeah.
back in the days. Californian designer, and my dad met him in the US on one of his travels, and they kind of connected pretty quick. And this guy came over to the winery for about a week and just lived with the family and lived with yeah, on the winery to kind of soak up the energy and the idea we have on the winery. And then he came up with this concept of the vineyard creatures, just to give them a bit more of a platform, as they're basically our co-workers in the vineyards, of course. So yeah, we're starting off with the hair label. We have two other winter creatures afterwards. But yeah, the basic idea was just to show the connection between the wine and of course the nature. And we share the nature with these animals, of course. So that's why they're on the labels.
And these were in the that was that in the 90s, George, was it?
That was beginning of the or mid of the 90s. Yeah, I
Middle of
think
the
94,
90s, yeah.
95 was the first. So yeah, the content is not a new one. It got a bit of a remake. I think like six or 7 years ago. But the
Wow.
basic idea is actually already pretty long ago. I think that's something we want to show with all of the labels. I mean, the last wine of the evening, the second last, the Riesling has a traditional label, which is also a label that we have since about 60 years and hasn't changed much.
That's the
Um,
traditional, the second wine.
the second, yeah, yeah. So it hasn't changed much, and of course, yeah, we'll talk about that later. That we didn't kind of go with time, but we still want to keep the traditions and
Okay.
show where we're coming from.
And I think you've been farming sustainably for a very, very long time. So the idea of the animals in the vineyard, in this case, the Gewürztraminer has the hair on it. The
Yeah.
idea that the animals are there, they're encouraged, they're part of the ecosystem, they're part of the biodiversity. I know that that's something that the estate is very keen to focus on and to talk about and to ensure that they're farming in harmony with nature and with the animals. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, we like I already said, we share this space with the animals. It doesn't belong to us. I mean, yes, on the paper, but not in a like a common sense. So we try to build an environment. Of course, we live from the wine that we grow, but we still try to create an environment where all the animals that naturally occur in the vineyards have their space, have their food, have their spaces to hide, to reproduce. So this is definitely something that we considered during our work in the fields.
Okay, thank you. So Gewürztraminer is number one, which is quite an unusual grape variety, isn't it? Can you talk to us about the aromas and flavors of Gewürztraminer?
So it's definitely a very distinctive grape variety. So what we say in the wine business, if you have like 20 or 30 different wines or grape varieties in front of you, with some grape varieties, it's a bit hard to distinct them just from the nose. But with Gewürztraminer, you will always get it on the first try because it's so expressive and so distinctive for just this grape variety. And I would say this is according to the aromas, it's a quite typical Gewürztraminer aromatics.
So lychee, rose petal, that type of
Exactly. A lot
aroma.
of people say Turkish delight is something that
Yeah.
they get in their mind. I'm not yeah, a big Turkish delight eater, so I didn't really get that connection. But it's definitely something very aromatic. Rose water is something that I get quite a bit. And
So
usually, yeah.
we have a question. What is the oldest grape variety in Germany?
The oldest grape variety in Germany. That's a tough question. Gewürztraminer is probably one of the oldest ones. Riesling is one of the oldest ones, but I couldn't really because all of the grape varieties we grow now are kind of yeah, crossings between very old ancient grape varieties. So probably Riesling and Gewürztraminer are the two oldest ones.
Okay. So someone is asking, as a habitual red wine drinker, if you should allow white wine to breathe, George.
Definitely. So of course, also white wine needs a bit of yeah, oxygen to develop the aromatics. So without oxygen, there would be no aromas as well. So for white wine, in the beginning, we need a little bit of oxygen so you can let a wine breathe and see how it kind of changes. However, for wines that are focused on the primary fruits, yeah, basically like or just live off a very fruity and aromatic profile, sometimes they lose the aromatics if you let them breathe for too long. So breathing, yes, but for a very short time, and then you can already realize if you're losing a bit of aroma, you will notice that it's been a bit too long. So breathing, yeah, for just a short period.
Okay. And I think the interesting thing with the Gewürztraminer, it's quite a deep color.
Definitely, yeah.
To see the Riesling, it's quite a deep, warm yellow color.
Yes.
So partly age, but partly the skins of the grapes, is it?
Definitely as well. And also a reason is that Gewürztraminer usually gets ripe very quick. So for Riesling, that's something we harvest at the end of the harvesting period. So nowadays that would be beginning of October, end of September. Gewürztraminer is usually the first grape variety we harvest because it builds a lot of sugar at a very early stage already. And the color of the skin is not like, for example, a Riesling, yellow and greenish. The color of the Gewürztraminer skin has almost like a copper color. So it's very dark in color. And that also brings a bit more of a color into the wine in the end.
Okay, thank you.
And
So
also the reason, yeah, the ripeness, so it's 2020. So ripeness brings a bit of color, and also how ripe the grapes were harvested. And Gewürztraminer is usually harvested or gets riper pretty quick, so it's also harvested a bit riper.
So in terms of a food match for this wine, you said duck liver or mushroom patty with toasted bread. So
Yes.
you've linked that directly with the flavors and aromas in the wine. So why don't you talk to us about those aromas and flavors and then explain why you went for that food match?
Yeah, so we definitely for the Gewürztraminer we need something that is a bit more savory, as the Gewürztraminer has quite a rich structure. When you drink the Gewürztraminer, you can already feel that it's quite a rich and quite a dense wine. So we need something that can like keep up with it. And also I like the umami flavors of the mushroom and also the duck liver. So that combines quite well. And it just gives you kind of a heartwarming, savory, wintry feeling to combine, yeah, that kind of explosive aromatics or floral, exotic aromatics, and then with like the savory duck liver.
It's quite luxurious, isn't it? The aromas, the very luscious aromas and flavors of the Gewürztraminer, and then the very sort of, quite luscious flavors of the mushroom and the duck. It's a very kind of hedonistic combination, I think, but it works really well.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's perfect for this season right now, where you kind of when you drink wine or when you have a bit of food, you just want to kind of be hugged by the food and the wine. It's just
Yeah.
during these cold and dark times, it's yeah, it's sometimes nice to eat or drink something where you can just lean in and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well, I should mention that your brother Carol, as well as working in the winery and helping in the family business, is a chef. So there's a big love of food and wine matching in your family. So I feel that we're getting more than our usual kind of, we're getting a bit more expertise on the food and wine matching tonight. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I think that's in general with wine, it's not only about making wine, but it's about the whole lifestyle, combining wine with food, or in general enjoying wine and food, and I think that's a big part of a winemaker's life as well, or what should be a big part.
exactly. So you mentioned being a winemaker, but you started off as a geologist, didn't you?
Yes, kind of
A
took a
turn.
side road before I came back into the winery. Yeah, and so right after school, basically, in the age where you don't really know what you want to do, and of course, looking at the winery or at the family business, you want to kind of break out and do everything different. And then I had a few years where I kind of traveled the world, studied geology, and also finished the studies and worked as a geologist for a short time. But then 2017, yeah, I'm not sure if the gravitation of wine was stronger than the passion for rocks. And of course, yeah, having a family winery, a family business at home, it's always hard to, or it's always around. You're never completely out of it. Even me studying geology, I was always home for harvest and also during the season. So you never leave that behind you completely. So coming back was not a big cut. It was just kind of the logical evolution, and I don't want to miss the time studying or doing something different, which is not completely different. So this definitely helps me now. And also gave me a different view of the world and how the world kind of it's created changes. Also the climate aspects was something we learned a lot about in geology. So yeah, don't want to miss that, but I'm happy I'm back.
Yeah. Happy to be a winemaker. We're tasting the wines tonight. We're happy that you decided to be a winemaker tonight as well, George.
Yeah.
So there's a question here from Sonia saying, what unique family traditions have passed down through the 14 generations of winemaking in your family, and how do they contribute to the distinct character of your wines?
So that's a very interesting question. So especially in the last two or three generations, where quite a lot of things changed in winemaking. As wine became a bit more of an industrial project, of course, with all the enhancements in technology and what we can add to the wine. So we are basically still making wine similar to how the three, four, or five generations before us made wine. I mean, we have electricity now, so that's something we don't want to miss. And of course, we're working also with stainless steel now, which like four generations before they couldn't use that. But basically, in the way how we think, we're not far away from how they worked back in the days. And this is especially when we look at the winemaking process. So by not adding anything to the wine, by using old presses, by leave or giving the wine more time to develop. So these are probably the main things that we kind of use. And we are still in the process of even taking some steps further back and finding out what do we really need, what kind of technical improvement is helpful for the wine, and what kind of
Okay.
yeah, kind of
We can talk a bit more about that, but let's pour the estate Riesling and the second wine. And while we're doing that, someone is asking, how long can you leave the bottle for in the fridge? How long can you leave a bottle of wine open in the fridge? Sorry.
Yeah,
So an open wine bottle. Maybe this is a good time to mention the screw caps, George.
Yes. So it's a difficult question, or it's hard actually to answer it on a general basis, because it depends on so many factors. First of all, I would say it depends on if it's a good wine or a bad wine. So if it's a wine that kind of loses its flavor very quickly, or that just really lives off its primary flavors, then sometimes even after 2 or 3 days, it's not that interesting anymore. On the other hand, if you have a wine that has a bit more acidity, that is not only living off the flavor, sometimes 5 or 6 days can even help the wine to get better. So it's hard to answer this question. I would say the more complex the wine is, the longer you can leave it open. And of course, it always depends on how full the bottle is. If it's still half full, then in general for white wine, I would say 3 to 4 days, sometimes longer. If it's only just a sip left, then I would take the sip and sip it away. In general, maybe for white wines, 3 to 4 days.
Okay. As with all things wine, there isn't one straightforward answer. The answer to will George be at the O'Briens Wine Fest this year? He will be. And the festival dates this year are the 11th and 12th of October. So that's dates for the diary, and George will be there on the table with all his wines. So that's 11th and 12th October.
Definitely.
So, let's talk about the estate Riesling then. What's the kind of main difference between the vineyard creature labels and your estate Riesling? Let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so basically the idea of the vineyard creatures in the beginning was that we have the freedom to kind of also buy grapes from other wineries, from friends, to kind of if we can produce enough grapes, we can still have grapes from the region, from the same village, from friends that we can use for the vineyard creatures. So that was the basic idea to kind of, for the estate line, it was only our own grapes, and for the vineyard creatures, it was also grapes from the same village. Nowadays, all of the grapes are coming from our own vineyards. All of the grapes are hand-picked. So basically, the differences in is not that big anymore. The estate wines are usually a tiny bit drier now. But yeah, like I said, the differences are more in the label design now than in the wine style.
What about the more traditional label? You were saying that is an old label still, the estate Riesling.
Yeah, so we kept that for about 70 years. So the last label, or the first label we have from that the traditional style is about 70 years ago, and we haven't really changed it since then. So this is also kind of, or for us, a way to communicate our bond to the tradition, and like I said before, to the way of winemaking, how it was done in the past. So this is why we kind of keep up with the label.
Well, I think a 70-year-old label is definitely one of the unique family traditions that's been passed down. It partly answers the question earlier, you know.
Yeah, definitely. That's also part, and of course a part of the communication. I mean, tradition has to be lived, and only with tradition it doesn't make good wine.
Oh,
But it's also important to kind of, especially in wine, to kind of remember where you're coming from, and how your ancestors made wine, and how they kind of understand also the region, and because that's another very important topic in wine, to show where the wine is coming from, to show the origin. And we've had quite some years now to kind of figure out what's how do we bring out the origin in the wine? How do we carve out that unique origin?
okay. Thank you. So this Riesling, why don't you just describe the aromas and flavors for us, George? It's great to get a winemaker to talk us through his own wine.
Yeah, so Riesling is a grape variety that nowadays you can find in all different countries. So it's still a grape variety that mostly grows in cool climate regions. But it traveled quite a bit. So you can find Riesling in Australia, you can find Riesling in New Zealand, in Canada, in the US, in France, of course. But what is very typical for the Riesling in Germany, and especially in the area where we are, so we are in the southwestern part of Germany, about an hour south of Frankfurt, just to give you an idea where we're based. The main aromatics in this area for Riesling is that on one hand the like apple citrus flavors, but what comes out even more, and what is very typical, is that yellow stone fruit flavor, like almost peachy, um, like a ripe peach. So this is very typical for our area here. And then, of course, what always comes with a Riesling, or with a good Riesling, is the acidity. So that kind of freshness that tingles on your tongue, combined with these citrus flavors. This is what Riesling is known for. What people love about Riesling. And even though there's some Rieslings that are even like more on the sharpness of the acidity, I think the combination between the acidity and the end, and still a bit of aromatics, and yeah, that yellow stone fruit flavors in the beginning of the palate, that's a style that kind of shows what the pulse can bring.
And you suggested matching this to either a summer risotto or, sorry, a spring risotto. I'm just wishing for sunshine and a cold night in Ireland here. And so a spring risotto or Coco Riesling. So you're
Yeah.
not saying Coco Van, you're saying Coco Riesling.
Yeah, kind of a bit of a change in the main ingredient. So it's important to use a Riesling in that recipe, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, um, wine culture and food culture is connected very strongly. So it's not a coincidence that in a lot of regions the typical food matches with the regional wines. And I mean, coq au vin sounds like a French recipe, and it is a French recipe. But as you know, France is just half an hour away from us, especially Alsace. So there is quite a connection to the food culture in France as well. So I think we can definitely call it Coco Riesling.
Coco Riesling.
Yeah, and the reason behind it is, of course, we have a Riesling with a nice acidity, so we can have a dish that brings quite a bit of fattiness as well, that the acidity can like cut through. So that's why, yeah, a Coco Riesling or a risotto with quite a lot of creaminess, where the Riesling comes, or can play out his flavor profile quite well. So it kind of a counterbalance to the creamy, savory flavors. And of course, the fruit kind of lightens it up as well.
Thank you. So one of the, sorry, just answering a Winefest question quickly. The Winefest is in the RDS in Ballsbridge. And yeah, that's the venue in the Industries Hall in the RDS in Ballsbridge. So are there many, the next question, George, then, are there many vineyards in Germany that old? Where basically as old as, you know, your family's well, I think the vineyards are not 14 generations old, but what's your oldest vineyard?
So the oldest at the moment is about 55 years old,
Okay.
which is already quite old for a vineyard in this region here.
Uh-huh.
Um, so there was so there in some regions the vineyards can be much older,
They could be
but
over 100, couldn't they, quite easily?
they
See
can
the
be
Mosel or
100,
something.
200, 300 years sometimes, very
Okay.
rarely. But in this region here, we had a problem with yeah, a little yeah, animal in the ground that kind of killed quite a bit of the old rootstocks. Um,
Phylloxera.
exactly. So I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with the phylloxera, but this little animal kind of killed a lot of the rootstocks about 120 years ago. So after that, winemakers had to come up with an idea to make the wines more resistant against this little animal, which was brought over from the US. Um, so the idea was to plant plant wines that are divided in the middle, and they have a bottom part which comes from an American rootstock, and the top part which comes from a European rootstock, like a normal grape like Riesling. And if you combine those two, you can still have the typical wines from that grape variety, but the roots are kind of protected from the phylloxera. And this is why most of the wines in this region here are not older than 50 or 60 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
A question's just come in from Adam and Lisa. Does Germany have a wine classification system like the AOC system in France?
Yes, we do, but it's a bit different, and it's also kind of in the change at the moment. So we have a wine law from 1971 with a classification that doesn't classify like the AOC system in France after origin, but it classifies the wine after the ripeness of the grapes. For example, what we still have on the label sometimes with the estate Riesling, for example, Kabinett, Riesling, Auslese, Beerenauslese, Trockenbeerenauslese. So these are the categories or the classifications that Germans used for their wines.
And that's to do with the sugar level in the grapes at harvest time.
Exactly. Nothing to do with the sugar level of the wine, only in the grapes during harvest.
Okay.
And that tells you something about the richness and of course in the end, if it's a dry wine, the alcohol of the wine. So the more sugar I have in the grape, the more alcohol I have in the wine. So back in the days, this was definitely a classification that made sense because it was hard to get grapes ripe. So it was definitely something that made a wine more valuable if it was riper. Nowadays, with climate change, it's a bit different, but we still kind of hold on to that classification because it's the only classification in the world that forbids chaptalization, so adding sugar to the juice before fermentation. And this is why we kind of still keep with that classification, because it tells you as a consumer, if it says Kabinett or Spätlese on the wine, that there is no sugar added into the juice during or before fermentation.
Basically, it's natural ripeness.
Yeah, exactly. But still, there is a movement in Germany right now that they want to kind of adapt to the AOC classification in France. So that's what's happening in Germany right now. So it's a bit of the state right now is that there are two classifications. and they're trying to shift the classifications to the AOC.
Okay, great.
It's a bit confusing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what's going to happen is that they're going to be the origin classification from France in the future.
Okay. Well, George, listen, we've got a question about your non-use of corks, but I think it's a good point to take a couple of minutes break just to allow people to top up on crackers or cheese or water or just a couple of minutes refreshment. So that's 1939. We'll be back at 1941. So we just have a couple of minutes break and we'll be back shortly, everyone. Thanks very much. Okay, great. So thanks, George. So the last question we had before we took a break there was, why do you not use corks?
Yeah, so we do use cork for some wines, especially the wines that have a bit more oak or that are even harvested riper. So for example, the Auslesers, and also for some of the red wines, which have been in new oak for a longer time, because these wines need more time to breathe, and a screw cap kind of keeps the wine in the same state for quite some time. So there's not a lot of oxygen coming through. There's not a lot of change in the wine. So this is perfect for wines that are more on the fruity, on the fresh side. And for example, for red wines that still need some time or some years to breathe and to develop, we still use cork for these wines.
Okay. Kind of screw cap keeps the wine almost the way the winemaker made it, and it's good for youthful young wines. And then the corks just gives a bit more oxygen ingress and just gives a bit more complexity and so on.
Exactly. Of course, cork always has the risk that that bottles taste a bit different after a few years, and of course the risk of the cork flavor. So therefore, the screw cap is a closure that is very reliable, and that kind of like keeps the wine in a good state for a very long time.
Okay. So while we while we start to get ready to talk about the bird label Riesling, there's a question there, George, about whether Lingenfelder make ice wine.
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't do ice wine anymore. Probably out of two reasons. So reason one is that ice wine is unfortunately not really looked after in the market anymore. So the market for ice wine has declined quite a bit. That is one reason. And of course, the other reason, and which is probably the main reason, is that, of course, due to climate change, it's harder and harder to make ice wine in the area where we are, because there are quite some hard restrictions on the ice wine production. So you can only harvest ice wine grapes at a temperature of -7 degrees. So this doesn't really happen a lot anymore in Germany. So you would need temperatures like this usually in November or December. If you only get them in February, that's too late for the grapes to still be in good shape. So you need like very low temperatures at a very or just shortly after harvest. And this doesn't really occur in Germany anymore. So this is why nowadays Canadians have the better conditions for
the climate.
Yeah, the better climate for ice wine.
And interesting, leading on then to a climate question. How are you managing such a delicate, inspiring business and the challenges of climate change? I imagine a degree or two change in temperature or no water can cause havoc to your plans.
Definitely, this is the main challenge for us over the next decades, and already in the last, I would say, 2 decades, where we can visibly see the effects of the climate change. First example I can maybe say is that the time when we harvest changed, yeah, dramatically. So when I talk to my dad or to my aunt on how their harvests were 30, 40 years ago, they always tell me they were out there in jackets and gloves, and they were freezing, and it was like really cold in the middle or end of October, beginning of November. And nowadays we are running out end of August, no shirt on. It's 30 degrees sometimes. So the temperatures and the time of the harvest has changed very much just in a few decades. So that's just one very visible example. And of course, water is quite a problem already, especially because we say we're not going to irrigate our wines. So this is our dogmatic approach almost, that we say wine as a luxury good should not be um, water should not be used for like a luxury good as wine. If wine doesn't grow in an area, it shouldn't be forced to grow there. So we need to think about other solutions to cope with climate change. And this is like like we already said in the beginning, a sustainable soil management is basically the only thing we can do to improve or to cope with the climate change. And if the soil absorbs more water, if the soil is lively, is nutrition, we can cope with the climate change much better than with soils that we just like kind of nourish and or soak out the energy from. So the work that we did in the last decades of sustainable and responsible farming helps us now a lot in coping with the water and the climate change issues we have.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the questions. The winning question, which was in the first half of the tasting, is Sonia. Her interesting question about 14 generations and unique. I can see Sonia celebrating there in the background. The unique traditions that are passed down within your family. I'll be honest, I don't think that we work with any other producers who have got such a long history. So for us, it's an honor that you've been able to join us and chat to us. Let's talk about then, Sonia, you'll get a DM from us just to get your address to send the bottle to. So watch out for a DM for your address. Thanks, Sonia. So George, what about the bird label Riesling then? This was the first wine made in the Creature series, wasn't it, in the mid-90s?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, basically, Riesling is still the grape variety that Germany is known for. And this is also a style that goes a bit into the direction what German Riesling was famous for back in the days. Then that kind of changed a bit when German Riesling got utterly sweet over the time. So we're now the bird label shows a style of Riesling that's not overly sweet, but still transports a bit of sweetness in the wine. And the sweetness here does not come from any sweetness that is added, but that's the natural grape sweetness that is not fermented into alcohol. And in this case, as I said before, Riesling always has quite a tingling and strong acidity. And with the sweetness in the bird label, that gives a perfect balance, very high drinkability, almost dangerous for some, but still on a level where it doesn't appear syrupy or anything.
I must say, I don't have the mashed potato and the sausages and the sauerkraut and everything in front of me, but I can imagine with that lovely acidity, that actually is a very nice match. And while that's quite a traditional German sort of platter that you've suggested with the match.
The most traditional.
Sorry?
It's the most traditional.
Most traditional.
Food.
I think the acidity in Riesling would just keep everything really lovely and fresh and crisp. So
Yeah.
then on to the final wine of the evening, and it's the Dornfelder. So we've had the hare, we've had the bird, and now we have the fox. And I've actually changed glass for this. I'm going for a slightly rounder glass on my Dornfelder, just because I want to just release a bit more aroma from the Dornfelder. So talk to us about this grape, George. It's not a well-known grape. Even in Germany, it's not that widely planted, is it?
It's it has about, I think it's 15% of the red wine grapes in Germany. So
Okay.
it is or it has quite a good coverage. But it's a very relatively young grape variety. So
Cross.
was that?
The crossing.
Yeah, yeah. So the crossing was only done about 60 years ago or 70 years ago, and it's in commercially planted about 60 years ago. So yeah, it's a grape variety that is adapted to like cool climate regions. Um, and it brings out quite a lot of fruit and always lives off more of a lighter red wine style. If you look at the color, it looks more like a very heavy, strong red wine. The color is
Yeah,
crazy,
it's very,
very
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 dense.
intense. This is because of there's a lot of color in the skins. So yeah, just with also with a short maturation, you already get a very intense color. And then in the nose you have yeah, quite a lot of dark berry flavors. Also light notes of like peppery notes a bit in the back. But it's basically yeah, mostly on the fruity side. And then different to what you expect when you see the color on the palate, it's a very lively red wine, not too heavy, not too
Very
punchy.
fruity, very
Um,
soft, very supple.
exactly. You
Really
still,
nice.
yeah, you still get the tannins. You can tell they're there. It's a red wine that kind of also fills out your mouth, but it's not something um, that brings in that fur on your tongue that you know from really
Yeah,
heavy
you
oak.
don't get that grippy,
Exactly.
thing
Yeah.
in the gums. George, we did talk about irrigation, but someone, Adam and Lisa were asking, if it's irrigation is allowed in Germany.
Yes, yes, it's allowed and it's been used in most regions. So it's something I would have to guess, but I think that at least 50% of the wines in Germany are irrigated, which is yeah, quite a lot. And we are not really, so that's not part of our philosophy. We call our wines or we want to create wines that are farm sustainable and that are yeah, produced as natural as possible. And for us, irrigating the wines does not really match that philosophy and that idea.
Okay, thank you. Someone is asking, how many wines do the estate make? How many different wines do you make at the estate? Because you've got this range, which you're the winemaker. You've also got your own range as well, don't you?
Exactly, yeah. So
Dog's range.
it's about 25 different wines that we do in total. Only grape varieties that have a tradition here in the region. So we don't grow any Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet Sauvignon. So we have 10 different grape varieties. It's yeah, Riesling, Silvaner, Gewürztraminer, Morio Muscat, Scheurebe, Spätburgunder, so Pinot Noir, Dornfelder. So those are the typical grape varieties in our region, and we grow those. Yeah, and then I do my own line, which is even a step further towards what some people would call natural wine. So I skip the filtration, and the sulfur levels are none or just a few milligram. So this is just a step further towards the idea of yeah, creating a wine that is very lively, that kind of changes also quite a bit throughout its history. Also in the bottle, it still changes quite a bit. So it's a lively product, and we want to kind of show nature as best as possible. Yeah, so different ideas, and this is also what I said before, kind of even another step backwards in time, without, of course, neglecting the technology we can use now, but it's still reconsidering what do we really need to produce wine, and what is necessary to kind of protect the nature, and still have a product that kind of shows where it's coming from. So that's a big topic, the origin.
There's a question from Adam Lisa, how the Dornfelder is aged, George.
It's actually aged in big oak barrels, and the oak barrels that's quite interesting as well, because that doesn't really you don't really find that a lot anymore. The oak barrels are almost 120 years old, so this is quite a few generations that have been working with these old oak barrels. Usually for like small oak barrels, you would not use them longer than 20 or 25 years. But for big oak barrels, they're about 3,000 to 4,000 liters. The wood is so thick, you can use them for a very, very long time if you take good care of them. If they're always full with wine, and if you take out the wine, you put new wine in. If you do that for a long time, then you can keep them for a lot of decades. So the wine was aged in these old oak barrels. They don't add oak flavor to the wine anymore, but you get that micro oxidation over time, and it's been in there almost 24 months, so almost 2 years.
It's very soft, really delicious. So, George, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining. It's been a really interesting tasting and interesting food matches. So really appreciate it. I don't know, I'm sure that Rainer and Elizabeth and Carol are somewhere in the background, so give them our best regards from everyone here in Ireland. In your final year of your enology, you've got your dissertation at the moment, haven't you? So you're you've done all the exams, you've passed all the exams, you've just got your final paper to write. So I know that you're mad busy doing that just now.
Yeah, true. The priorities were a bit more on winemaking than on the studies in the last 2 years. So, but
thank goodness we get some nice glasses of wine on the back of that.
So I'll finish that this year. Yeah. So that's still quite a bit of work, but on the other hand, it's a topic that I can use in the vineyard as well. So it's more kind of a self-studying combined with a thesis. So yeah.
It sounds fun. So well, listen, thanks very much. George, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed the tasting. And for those of you that want to meet George in the flesh, for those of you that haven't done so already, just to remind you, he'll be at the O'Briens Wine Festival in October, and that's the 11th and 12th of October. So listen, thank you very much, and great that everyone could join us this evening. Thanks again, George. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I wish you a good evening with the rest of the bottles, so you don't have to finish them tonight, like I said. But I won't stop you if you want to. So yeah, enjoy the wine, enjoy the food, and hopefully see you on the wine fair in October.
Great. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.